She had always worn green, and for as long as anyone could remember, no one ever questioned it. It wasn't simply a color, but a quiet understanding that something about her was different. Something about the way she held herself, the way her presence seemed to blend with the earth itself. In the village, it was said that green was a color of peace, of balance, of harmony with nature. Yet there was an unspoken rule. If something felt off with the green, it was best not to ask. The villagers learned quickly that their quiet curiosity should remain just that, quiet. But when the green flowers around her home began to wither and die, and the lively laughter she was once known for faded into silence, even the boldest of them hesitated. The winds whispered, and the sun seemed to dim when she walked by. But still, no one dared to ask. They simply watched as the once vibrant green that had defined her began to lose its luster. But they didn't know. The worst was yet to come. This time, her choice would not only change her life, but the fate of the entire village in ways no one could have foreseen. It was a quiet, sunny day in the village, the kind where the air was warm and the hills stretched endlessly into the horizon, their green slopes dotted with wildflowers. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees blended with the distant murmur of people at work. In the fields, the farmers bent over their crops, their bodies moving rhythmically in the sun. Women, with their sleeves rolled up, washed clothes by the river, their laughter mingling with the gentle flow of water. The elderly sat on the worn wooden benches under the shade of the large oak tree at the village square, exchanging stories and gossip about the happenings of the day. Life in the village was calm, predictable, and unhurried. At the center of this peaceful world was Irina, a woman of middle age, with long, dark hair that cascaded down her back in soft waves. She moved through the village like a shadow, always present but never quite understood. She was always dressed in green, from her headscarf to the soles of her shoes. Green had become her color, a hue that defined her every appearance. It was said that she had once been lively, that her laughter had filled the air, but those who remembered that time were few. Now she was simply a figure of quiet mystery. No one quite knew why she wore only green. It was not a fashion, nor a statement. It was just the way she was, as if the color had become a part of her soul. The village was an old one, nestled between forests and fields, its traditions unbroken for centuries. The land had been kind to its people, yielding enough crops to feed them, and the seasons rolled by in a gentle, predictable cycle. But as the years passed, a subtle change began to take place. Irina, once a woman full of energy, began to retreat into herself. Her eyes, once bright and full of life, seemed to have lost their sparkle. The smile that had once been a part of her nature had faded, replaced by a quiet melancholy. The villagers noticed, of course, but no one spoke of it aloud. There was an understanding that some things were better left unspoken, as if questioning her was the same as disturbing a delicate balance. What puzzled them most was her sudden interest in the forest. Irina began spending more and more time there, walking alone, day and night. No one knew exactly where she went or what she did, for she never told anyone. She would disappear into the trees, her green dress blending into the landscape, and return hours later, her face unreadable. Some had tried to ask, but she would simply smile softly and walk away without saying a word. The village was filled with whispers, whispers of strange rituals, of secrets held deep within the forest. But despite their curiosity, the villagers kept their distance. It was as if an unspoken fear had gripped them. No one dared to approach her directly. Instead, they watched from a distance, exchanging nervous glances when she passed by. And so, life in the village continued, unchanged on the surface. But beneath the calm, there was a growing unease, a sense that something was not right. Irina's behavior, once so predictable, had become a source of quiet tension. The green that had once seemed so natural on her now felt heavy, like a symbol of something hidden, something that no one dared to uncover. The villagers knew that the time was coming when the mystery of Irina and her green would have to be confronted. But for now, they could only watch, waiting for the truth to emerge. In the quiet years before the change, Irina had been a different person. She was young then, vibrant and full of life, a girl whose laughter could be heard from the village square to the edge of the forest. Her green dresses, always perfectly chosen, seemed to glow against the backdrop of her sparkling eyes and carefree spirit. She had been the center of every gathering, her smile as natural as the sun rising over the hills each morning. People would stop to admire her as she passed, her presence brightening even the dullest of days. The village knew her as a joy to be around, and life seemed simple and full of possibility. But life, as it often does, had other plans. She met Alexei when she was just a young woman, and from the first moment they spoke, there was a quiet connection. He was different from the other men in the village. No grand gestures or flashy displays, but his kindness spoke volumes. He wasn't rich, but his love for her was clear, deep, and steady. Irina's heart had been drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain, and before long, they were married. The first years of their marriage were filled with hope. They dreamed of a future together, filled with children and laughter. Alexei, with his quiet strength, would work in the fields, while Irina would weave stories of what their life would be like once their family was complete. However, as the years passed, the children never came. At first, it was something they could ignore, a delayed blessing, a hopeful pause. But as the months turned into years, the silence in their home began to grow. Irina, once so full of laughter, now became quieter, her eyes dimming with each passing month without a child. Alexei, who had once been so patient, began to show signs of frustration. It wasn't just the silence between them, it was the pressure that came from those around them. Irina's mother, the neighbors, the friends who had once gathered around her, began to ask questions, questions that grew more pointed with every year that passed. The whispers became harder to ignore. Alexei, no longer the patient man he once was, would often come home tired, the weight of his disappointment clear on his face. He didn't speak as much, and when he did, his words were sharp, tinged with a frustration he hadn't known he had. Irina tried everything she could think of: doctors, herbs, prayers. She consulted with anyone who might have the answers, but the answers never came. Each time she failed, the weight on her heart grew heavier. Alexei's once gentle touch became distant. He no longer spoke to her with the same warmth, and slowly his love for her seemed to slip away. Irina would lie awake at night, the emptiness in her stomach growing more painful with each passing year. She had tried everything, given everything, but still, no child. Alexei would turn his back to her in the night, the distance between them growing as the years wore on. She didn't know how to fix it anymore. She didn't know if there was even anything left to fix. The woman who had once been the center of every conversation was now the subject of hushed tones and worried glances. The woman who wore green and smiled brightly was now a shadow of herself, the vibrant colors of her life slowly fading to a quiet, deep green. She couldn't tell if it was the years of silence that wore her down, or if it was the pressure of her own growing disappointment. All she knew was that something inside her had broken, and the hope that had once filled her was now a quiet ache she carried with her every day. What had once seemed like an endless future was now a road she walked alone, with nothing but the memories of better days to guide her. As the years wore on, the weight of Irina's longing became unbearable. The silence that had once been filled with hope now consumed her, and the disappointment in her heart grew with each passing day. The village, with all its familiar faces, no longer offered her comfort. The whispers of the people, the looks of pity from the women who had once admired her, only served to deepen the void inside her. She had tried everything: the doctors, the herbalists, the prayers, but nothing seemed to work. No matter what she did, she could not escape the empty space in her home and her heart. One evening, after another quiet dinner with Alexei, Irina felt the old familiar restlessness stirring within her. She could no longer ignore the growing sensation that the answers she sought lay beyond the village, beyond the people who knew only the surface of her pain. She decided to leave, to seek something, anything, that could help her understand the emptiness she had carried for so long. In the dead of night, she gathered her things, her green dress flowing softly in the moonlight, and set off toward the old forest, a place whispered about by the villagers but rarely visited. The forest was deep, and its paths were tangled with years of growth, but Irina knew where she was going. She had heard stories of an ancient shrine hidden deep within the woods, where the local wise ones, the ones who could commune with forces beyond the physical world, could offer answers to those brave enough to ask. The air in the forest was thick with the scent of moss and earth, and the further she walked, the more she felt the weight of centuries pressing around her. She had been here before, in her childhood, but now it felt different. This time, the forest seemed alive, aware of her presence, and it seemed to breathe with a quiet anticipation. At the shrine, an old man waited. His face was weathered, his eyes dark and knowing. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her with a piercing gaze that seemed to see straight through to her soul. Irina felt herself shiver under his stare, but she remained silent, waiting for him to speak. Finally, he did, his voice low, almost a whisper, as if the forest itself was listening. "You have come to ask for something," he said, "and I can give it to you. But understand this: nothing comes without a price. The gift of life is a heavy burden, and the path to it is not one you have walked before." Irina nodded, though she could not yet comprehend what he meant. She had come here for an answer, but this felt different. The man continued, his voice steady and calm. "To become a mother," he said, "you must make a sacrifice. The green that you wear, the color that binds you to the earth, is both a blessing and a chain. To carry life, you must embrace the earth completely, but in doing so, you will give up something precious. The choice is yours." Irina felt a chill run through her as she looked at the old man. She had known that something must be given, but she hadn't expected this. She had come seeking answers, but now she was faced with the possibility of losing something even more important than the hope of a child. Still, her heart burned with the desire to be a mother. The years of waiting, of longing, weighed heavily on her soul, and she knew deep down that this was the only chance she would have to fulfill the dream she had carried for so long. She nodded, her decision made. She left the shrine with a heavy heart, her mind swirling with uncertainty, but the seed of hope had been planted. As she made her way back through the forest, the green that had once been a symbol of life now felt oppressive, as though it were suffocating her. The color that had once brought her comfort now seemed to mock her, reminding her of the sacrifice she had just agreed to make. She didn't feel relief, only a growing sense of unease. Something was changing inside her, something she couldn't yet name, but she knew that her life would never be the same. When she returned home, Irina could no longer look at the green that had defined her for so long. It no longer held the same meaning. It felt like a symbol of the past, a past that she had just let go of. But the choice had been made. She would follow the path she had been given, no matter the cost. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: her life would change forever. Years passed, and Irina continued to wear the green that had once been a symbol of hope. But now, The color seemed to weigh heavily on her. The vibrancy that had once filled her life had faded, replaced by an unbearable silence. Each day felt like an endless stretch of gray, a struggle against a void that seemed to grow larger with time. She no longer laughed, no longer smiled. The woman who had once been the heart of the village was now a shadow of herself, drifting through her days with a quiet resignation. The villagers, who had once admired her, began to talk. They whispered about how strange Irina had become. She no longer greeted people with the warmth she had once shared so freely. She avoided eye contact, choosing to remain in the background, away from the prying eyes of those around her. She had withdrawn into herself, finding solace in the plants that surrounded her home. Her garden, once full of vibrant life, had become a place of melancholy. The green leaves and vines that had once flourished now seemed to wither, as if mirroring the emptiness inside her. Despite her attempts to nurture her plants, their color had started to fade. The once lush greenery was now dull, their leaves drooping as though they too had lost their will to thrive. Irina's connection to the earth, to the green that had once defined her, felt like it was slipping away. The plants that had been her refuge in the darkest of times were now another reminder of how little had changed in her life. Her longing for something more, for a life that felt full, grew stronger with each passing day. And then one evening, her husband, Alexei, came home with news that shattered the fragile calm she had managed to hold on to. He had been offered a job in another city, a position that would take him far away from their home, from the village, from her. The news was a quiet blow, one that left Irina speechless. Alexei was leaving. The life they had built together, the hope they had once shared, was now unraveling before her eyes. He had already packed his bags, already made plans for his departure. Irina felt a deep emptiness welling up inside her, a loss that seemed even more profound than the years of unfulfilled longing for a child. As Alexei prepared to leave, Irina found herself alone in the house. The empty walls echoed with silence, the once familiar space now feeling like a cold, lifeless shell. She wandered through the house, touching the things they had shared, but it all felt distant, as if it had belonged to someone else. The plants in her garden were now beyond saving, their colors drained completely. It was as though the last connection to life had withered away, leaving only an oppressive stillness in its place. Desperate and broken, Irina made the decision to return to the old sage, the one who had given her the cryptic advice years ago. She needed answers. She needed something to guide her through the darkness that seemed to be swallowing her whole. She sought him out in the same forest, walking the path she knew so well, her heart heavy with the weight of her despair. When she arrived at the shrine, the old man was waiting for her. His eyes met hers, and she saw the same deep knowledge there, the same understanding that had once frightened her. He didn't speak, merely watching her with an intensity that felt like it could pierce her very soul. Irina stood before him, her hands trembling, her heart racing, as the old man silently took in her brokenness. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She could not explain what she was feeling, only that she was drowning in a sea of sorrow, of loss, of the quiet void that had become her life. The sage did not offer her comfort, nor did he speak the reassuring words she had hoped for. He simply looked at her, his silence heavy with meaning. Irina, understanding that he had no answers to give, sank to her knees before him. There would be no magical cure, no simple solution. She would have to face the pain, the emptiness, and whatever came next alone. The weight of her own despair settled over her like a shroud, and for the first time, she understood that the path she had chosen was one she would have to walk on her own. The sage's eyes never left hers, and in that moment, Irina knew there was no going back. She had made her choices, and now she would have to live with them. The path ahead was uncertain, and the future seemed bleak, but she had no choice but to continue moving forward, even if she did so in silence. Irina felt the weight of her life pressing down on her, the endless stretch of days blending into one long blur of emptiness. The silence in her home was suffocating, the air thick with the quiet absence of everything she had hoped for. Each step she took felt heavier than the last, as if the ground beneath her had turned to lead. The years of waiting, the years of living in the shadow of unspoken grief, had finally brought her to a place where she could no longer go on. It was as if she had reached a dead end and there was no turning back. In a moment of quiet desperation, Irina made the decision to seek the sage again. She had tried everything she knew, and nothing had worked. Her life, her dreams, her hope for a family, all seemed to slip further away with each passing day. She needed answers, but not just any answers. She needed a way out, a way to break free from the prison she had built around herself. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that she had no other choice. She had to find the key to unlock her future, even if it meant sacrificing everything she had once believed in. The forest felt colder this time, as if it too understood the gravity of the decision she was about to make. Irina walked through the trees, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. The sage was waiting for her, just as he had been before. His presence was the same, silent, knowing, and distant. But there was something different in the air now, something heavier. Irina stood before him, her eyes downcast, unsure of how to begin. But the sage seemed to already know what she sought. Without a word, he led her to the same place where their paths had crossed before. This time, he did not ask what she had come for. Instead, he simply spoke, his voice soft and distant, as though he were speaking from a place far beyond the world she knew. "You must let go of the green," he said. "It binds you to something that no longer serves you. To move forward, you must sever the ties to the past." The words hung in the air, their weight settling deep in her chest. Irina nodded, though part of her recoiled at the thought. The green had been a part of her for so long, a constant companion. It was the color of her identity, the fabric of her life. But the sage was right. The green had become a cage, a reminder of all that she had lost and could never have. It was a symbol of everything that had failed her, everything that had held her in a place of waiting. That night, Irina returned home, her mind spinning with the sage's words. She couldn't sleep, her thoughts racing as she turned them over in her mind. The green dress, the one she had worn for years, was no longer a comfort. It was a weight. It was time to let it go. She stood before her mirror, looking at the reflection of the woman who had worn that dress for so long, the woman who had carried the burden of unfulfilled dreams. And in that moment, she made her decision. She took off the green dress, slowly and carefully, as if removing a part of her own skin. The fabric felt foreign in her hands, no longer soft and comforting, but cold and heavy. She walked to the river, the dress trailing behind her like a memory. Without hesitation, she let it go, watching as the current carried it away, swallowed by the darkness of the night. The next morning, Irina awoke to a strange silence. The sun was rising, casting a soft light over the landscape, and for the first time in years, there was a sense of peace in the air. She stepped outside, unsure of what to expect, but as her eyes fell upon the garden, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. The plants, the ones that had withered and faded for so long, were alive again. The green was back, vibrant and full of life. The flowers bloomed, the leaves shimmered, and the vines stretched toward the sky as though they had been waiting for this moment. But despite the renewal in the garden, Irina felt an emptiness deep within her. The void that had plagued her for so long remained, and as much as the plants around her had revived, something inside her still felt hollow. The decision had been made. She had let go of the past, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something important had been lost in the process. The green had been her anchor, her identity, and now it was gone. The future was open to her, but it was uncertain, and the emptiness inside her seemed to stretch even further than before. The plants had come back to life, but she was still left wondering what, if anything, she had gained in return. Years had passed since Irina had let go of the green that had once defined her. The days blurred together, each one passing in a quiet rhythm, but nothing ever felt quite right. The garden had flourished again, as if the earth itself had forgiven her for the sacrifice she had made. Yet despite the outward signs of renewal, a restlessness lingered within her, a gnawing emptiness that never fully faded. The color that had once defined her life, her purpose, was gone, and she was left with nothing but a quiet space where something used to be. Irina no longer wore green, but she also found no comfort in the freedom it had promised her. She wandered through her days with a sense of displacement, as if she were living in someone else's life, someone else's skin. Her reflection in the mirror seemed foreign, and every time she looked at herself, she saw a woman who had lost something precious and could never get it back. She wasn't sure if she was free, but she was certain that freedom had come at a cost. Then one day, Alexei returned to the village. It had been years since he had left, his absence a constant, unspoken presence in her life. Irina had thought of him often, but the memories of their time together had slowly faded into the background, replaced by the weight of everything that had happened since. When she saw him, standing at the edge of the village, she felt a wave of emotions she hadn't expected. Surprise, sadness, longing. He had changed, as had she. His face was older, harder, but the same sadness that had once lived in his eyes was still there. Alexei looked at her as though she were a stranger, and for a moment, she wondered if he saw the same woman he had left behind, or if he saw someone completely different. She had changed, that much was clear. The lively woman he had once known, the one who had worn green with such pride, was gone. In her place stood a woman who was still searching for something but unsure of what it was. They spoke for a while, but the conversation felt hollow, like they were both trying to fill the empty space between them with words that no longer held meaning. It was clear that neither of them had the answers they were looking for. He told her that she had changed, that she seemed different, but Irina knew that he wasn't just talking about the color of her dress. He was talking about the way she held herself, the way she looked at the world. There was a distance now, a wall that neither of them could climb over. Irina stood in silence, looking at Alexei with a bittersweet smile. She had spent so many years wishing for something to change, wishing for a different life, and now that she had it, she wasn't sure if it had been worth the cost. She had given up everything for the promise of freedom, but in doing so, she had lost more than she had ever anticipated. "You're free now, Irina," Alexei said, his voice quiet but firm. "You've freed yourself from what held you back." Irina smiled again, but her eyes were distant, as though she were seeing something far beyond him, beyond the moment. She nodded, but the words didn't feel like enough. The freedom she had gained didn't feel like the release she had hoped for. It felt empty, hollow, like a dream she couldn't remember. She had let go of everything she thought was holding her back, but in the process, she had lost something important, something she hadn't even known was so vital until it was gone. As Alexei walked away, Irina stood there, watching him disappear into the distance. She had made her choices, and she had lived with the consequences. But now, in the quiet of the village, she realized that freedom didn't always come without sacrifice. She had freed herself from the green, from the past, but in doing so, she had lost something that would never be returned to her. It was a truth she would carry with her for the rest of her life, a freedom that had come at the cost of something precious, something she hadn't been ready to give up.